I think I've got everybody, Aimee Moulin, I think everybody that's in waiting was admitted. Hi, I'm Warren Lanford. I'm the current president of Michigan chapter of ACEP, MCEP, and we're glad to have the 5 candidates for the ACEP board with us today. It's a beautiful day here in Western Michigan. I don't know where, well, it's like everybody is, but it's absolutely gorgeous here. So I think that all 5 of the candidates are here. So what I was going to start with is having us go around, us meaning the MCEP side, go around and just quickly introduce yourself, like who you are and you know where you work, and so that you can kind of put a little bit of, they can get to know us a little bit. I know a lot of us know each other, but so I'm Warren Lanford. I'm from Western Michigan, practice in Grand Rapids. And just take it from there. I don't just step in and introduce yourselves quickly.
Hey guys. I practice in the Detroit area at St. Grace Hospital.
Hi guys, I'm Sarah Shackle. I practice in the Metro Detroit area at St. Mary Mercy Hospital.
Afternoon, everyone. Therese Mead on the MCEP BOD and also the co-chair of the Education Committee, work in Saginaw, Michigan for CMU Health.
Rami Corey, immediate past president of Mission College, work in Jackson, Michigan with IEP PC.
Hi, I'm Pam Coffey. I'm sorry, I'm coming home from another thing. I'm going to switch to computers, but I'm a physician at Sparrow Hospital in Lansing, Michigan.
Hi, I'm Abby Brackney. I'll be starting at Henry Ford in July. I'm on the board also.
I know Paul's trying to unmute himself. Why don't we just go ahead and so what I was going to do is for the candidates, I'm going to have you go through and just introduce yourselves and give like an opening statement. We'll do all 5 of you, then we'll go with the questions.
So I'm happy to start. My name is Arvind Venket. I'm a practicing emergency physician in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. As a native Detroiter and former faculty at your Mackinac conference, it's always great to reconnect with colleagues and friends from Michigan. I am running for the board because I am passionate for our mission to advocate for our members, to advocate for emergency physicians as the leaders in developing the highest standards of emergency care, and for being the voice for our patients, especially those who don't often have a voice, where we're the only ones who care for them. I chose to run for the board this year because I believe that there are 3 issues that we are facing that I've been fortunate to lead teams that have been successful in addressing. First, I think that we have a significant reimbursement issue where we are not receiving reimbursement for capacity and readiness in our frontline public health responsibilities. Having worked in reimbursement advocacy and successfully fighting against adverse balance billing legislation and downcoding, I'd like to bring that record in perspective to the board. Secondly, I think that we are facing a significant crossroads as an organization and as members of the college, where we see stagnating membership and certainly financial challenges that we're going to face, but also the opportunities that come with the new executive director coming into the college. We face those same challenges in Pennsylvania during my time as chapter president, including onboarding a new executive director. And we address these challenges by focusing on what we can do that no other organization could provide to our members. And that was namely advocacy, cost-effective continuing education that met their knowledge and credentialing requirements, as well as programming and opportunities for our younger members so that they became active within our chapter and made it a lifelong habit to be part of our organization. And that led to our raising our membership to an all-time high of over 1,900. Lastly, I think we face an ethical challenge where we are confronted with a question of our ability to protect ourselves and our family members as we care for our patients. And for some of our colleagues during the COVID crisis, a concern about the level of critical care resources versus the number of patients that they were seeing. Having worked professionally in the area of clinical ethics and having served as our ACEP chapter, or our ACEP ethics committee chair, I'd hope to bring that skill set to the board as well. So thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to answering your questions and the discussion.
Dr. Moulin, if you want to go next.
Sure, I'm Aimee Moulin. I'm a practicing emergency physician at UC Davis in Sacramento, California. I'm a past president of the California chapter. A couple things that were very important to me as chapter president that I think are relevant to where we are. I think that I agree with Arvind, we're at a crucial moment for our specialty. We are seeing threats that we were facing before, but new threats. I never thought we'd live through a pandemic. I never thought we'd see our volumes drop, but that's taught me a couple of things, that we're very dependent on volume. And at this time, we really need to think bigger. There is a tendency when you are stressed to grab onto what you have and to fight for it. And I think at this moment, we need to broaden that. We need to think bigger. We need to expand our pie. We should own things like public health. We should own things like addiction care. We should really start to look at telehealth and expand what we do. In California, we have expanded treatment for MAT, not only expanding access, but we're getting paid to do it. We have $40 million in federal funding that came into EDs. We just got another $20 million from the California state budget when they're cutting everyone else. We're negotiating with private payers to pay the emergency department to do this work. So the things that I think are important to us as a specialty is I want us to think bigger. I want us to think broader. I want us to use our resiliency and creativity as emergency physicians to build those public-private partnerships, to ask for things like standby time. I really think at this moment, we need to expand and to push our boundaries rather than to continue to fight the same fights. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Terry, you want to go next?
Sure thing. So good afternoon. I think it's probably afternoon where most people are today by now. I'm Dr. Aisha Terry. I really appreciate the opportunity, first of all, to speak with you all very much. I want you to know I don't take it for granted. And certainly during these crazy times, I appreciate more than ever seeing your faces, really, and seeing that everybody's hanging in there and doing well. So I am Aisha Terry, and I'm up for re-election to the board for a second term. I'm out of Washington, D.C. There I'm Associate Professor of Emergency Medicine and Health Policy at the George Washington University School of Medicine and the Milken Institute School of Public Health. There I do certainly work clinically, about 9 or 10 shifts a month. And I also teach a few courses in the School of Medicine, including things like professional development, as well as clinical public health. I also work at the DC VA hospital medically as well, about 50-50 between GW and the VA. And additionally, I serve as senior advisor to the Health Policy Fellowship at GW, and I actually was the director of that fellowship before I got elected to the board, and then I felt like I needed to get a few things off my plate so I could focus my attentions on board work. So I wanted to just share a few comments about what I've been doing over the past few years as representation and leadership for you on the board of directors. You know, I think that the year 2020 certainly has been a weird one thus far. I think we can all agree with that, but I'm actually excited about using the momentum and the energy from this year to kind of propel the college forward in a way that's really meaningful. I really think it's important that we focus on making the college come out of the pandemic more authentic, better prepared, and a better leader, not just for our specialty in emergency medicine, but really for healthcare in general. Over the past few years on the board, I've had the opportunity and pleasure really to serve as board liaison to several committees and sections. Specifically, I serve as the board liaison to the Quality Committee, as well as the CEDAR, or our Registry Data Committee as well. I serve as board liaison to our QUIPS, or Quality Section, as well as our Diversity, Inclusion, and Health Equity section, and the Undersea and Hyperbaric Medicine section as well. I've also been afforded to be appointed as a member of the Board of Trustees for EMF, as well as a board member for NIMPAC. And so I can say that when I was first elected to the board, I probably was known to most as a bit of a policy wonk, and maybe an academician and a diversity champion. But I'm grateful to say that I've necessarily and intentionally really diversified my skill set over the past few years to be able to better serve every single aspect of the college. And to that end, I do feel comfortable now to say that I can serve and speak to everything ranging from diversity to reimbursement. A lot of what I've done over the past few years has had to do with ACEP's quality portfolio. And you hear the word quality and you might kind of gloss over a little bit. It's not the most sexy or exciting word, certainly, and it's super broad. But I will say that I feel strongly that it's going to be our quality portfolio that takes ACEP to the next level. I don't know if you know or not, but about 12% of ACEP staff members are dedicated to our quality initiative. ACEP has 3 committees, 3 sections, and 3 task forces that are focused on specifically quality initiatives. And so it really is a huge piece of our portfolio at the college. And I believe when we use it wisely, we can achieve 4 main goals that will really propel us forward. Being that I serve as board liaison to several of these quality initiatives in the college, I really am the only member of the board who has been afforded the opportunity to be educated about quality. And I can tell you that it is super complex. It took me about a year really to get all of the acronyms together, understand the details of quality measure development and implementation, understanding registries, understanding the really complex web of organizations at the federal and private level that contribute to quality and that ACEP interacts with. But with that, I do feel strongly now that I have the skill set necessary to accomplish 4 goals through quality, through ACEP. Those 4 goals have to do with 1, quality measure development, which is vital and necessary for our specialty specific EM quality measures. Number 2 is bridging gaps within our specialty through quality to ensure that our quality measures are harmonized and that we decrease costs in terms of those efforts, which is really important. Number 3 speaks to really innovation. I do think that quality can be used to build upon the technical infrastructure that we need to take ACEP to the next level in terms of augmented intelligence and the like, but also to be creative around opportunities for non-dues revenue, which is absolutely vital to for the solvency of the college. And then the 4th goal, I think, speaks to the importance of making sure that we as working emergency physicians can easily respond to the government's requirements around quality in terms of payment. So specifically, I can tell you that CEDAR, or ACEP's data registry, saves over $300 million in avoided penalties for emergency physicians all over the country every single year. And that has to do with the fact that CEDAR has created a vehicle by which we can report our data, report our quality measures, do our clinical work, have that information sent to CMS, and then avoid penalties or even realize bonuses through CEDAR. And so it's a huge vehicle to help with our daily lives, to help with our livelihood and ensure that we get reimbursed properly. I can say that certainly in 2020, when we seem to be tugged at on every side and our reimbursement and pay is being jeopardized when you think about out-of-network billing cuts as well as decreased volumes across the country in the setting of the pandemic, we really have to prioritize and focus on ways to ensure the solvency really of our livelihoods in many ways. And I'm really happy to say that I think quality is going to be a very important way that we achieve that. So I just wanted to also add that, you know, generally speaking, I certainly recognize that there are a lot of complex and complicated and oftentimes polarizing issues that we face in the college, but I like to lead mission first. And I appreciate ACEP's mission statement, which is actually quite broad. So it speaks to ACEP advocating not just for emergency physicians, but for patients and for the public. And it speaks to ACEP advocating for emergency care. And I really appreciate that because it puts emergency physicians in the driver's seat, really, when it comes to all things emergency care and emergency medicine. And I like the fact that we'll be in the driver's seat to make sure that our specialty, as well as healthcare in general, is propelled into the future in the right direction. So in summary, I'll just add that my DC proximity is useful. Certainly being in DC is helpful. I've been able to attend countless CMS meetings and represent ACEP just partly because I'm here in DC and able to manage those representations. But in summary, you know, I love ACEP like we all do. Certainly it's vital really to my purpose. And I do believe that I have the skill set necessary to lead it into the future in ways that are bigger and better than have already been accomplished. So I appreciate having had the investment put into me in terms of my leadership and my growth, and look forward to continuing to do this work. So thank you all so much, and I appreciate your vote.
Thank you. Dr. Baker, do you want to go next?
Sure, yeah. I'm Michael Baker. Can everybody hear me okay? Can people hear me?
Hear you.
Okay. I apologize. I'm getting a lot of notification that I have low bandwidth, so if I'm breaking up, please let me know. I just want to make sure people can hear me. I'm Michael Baker. I'm a Board of Directors candidate for ACEP this year. Member of the Michigan College of Emergency Physicians, former president of the Michigan College of Emergency Physicians, and basically here to ask for your vote and the vote of the councillors of MCEP for Board of Directors. Many of you know I've been actively engaged in ACEP for many years now. Way back when Diane Bowman pulled me as a resident and started inviting me to do things at ACEP and MCEP, including attending my first council meeting way back then. And within ACEP, I have been actively involved with many different leadership activities, including the Leadership Diversity Task Force and Diversity Inclusion Task Force that I served on with Dr. Terry and was appointed to by Dr. Parker. The National Chapter Relations Committee, where I've been part of for the last 7 years, where we have, I've chaired the development of the Leadership and Advocacy Conference, chapter roundtables, and the Leadership Day topics, develops a lot of the leadership resources for small and medium chapters, and then of course being on council steering. Outside of ACEP, I'm the Director of Telemedicine for the Central Division of Envision and EPMG. I work with hospitals within the central region for about 10 states to develop telemedicine. And during the last 2 to 3 months of the COVID epidemic, we successfully deployed over 60 telemedicine programs across the region under my leadership. I have been a site medical director as well, and I'm also a practicing emergency physician. And then when I'm not working, you know, I enjoy spending time with my family, skiing, science fiction, and also a lot of other outdoor activities. So when it comes down to why do I want to be a board member for ACEP? Well, you know, I think we have, as I said last year, when I ran for the board last year, we are definitely at a crossroads. And I think this year proves it. We have hit financial concerns. We have concerns with COVID. We have concerns over our workforce and who's going to be providing that care in the emergency center, which is even more important now that our volumes are down. You know, we have volumes down across the country, and we're really concerned about what's going to happen with our new graduates of our emergency medicine residency programs. Where are they going to go? We are hearing people getting their places that they thought they were going to have a place to work. Suddenly they say, well, you know, we don't have a place for you anymore to start. And I think those are real serious concerns that we're going to need to address as a college moving forward. So I think that what I can contribute to the board is my ability to lead by bringing people together. I think one of our biggest challenges for ACEP is that we are increasingly fragmented. We have people on the left politically, people on the right politically, that we all have to work together within one group and find common ground. We have small groups, we have large groups. We have big contract management groups that are national and some that are very small. And again, we have to find ways of coordinating all those together to try to come to common goals. If we don't do this, I'm very concerned that we're going to risk our ability to advocate. And we need to be strong advocates and continue to be strong advocates for fair payment for our providers, for due process for our providers, for meeting the workforce needs, and also, especially in this pandemic, making sure that we advocate for safety guidelines, staffing, and the necessary waivers for telehealth. You all may recall that when the telehealth waivers came out, emergency doctors were not involved in any of that. We were not allowed to be part of that. So one of the things that I did was engage some of the people within the telemedicine section, as well as some of the people I knew on advocacy through some of the groups, other groups I work with, and try to come up with some communication lines to try to get HHS to release some of the waivers for telehealth for emergency centers as well. And we certainly got those. So I appreciate all the efforts that everybody put forth in trying to make that happen. So, essentially, I'm looking for being on the board so I can help guide us through this crossroad. I have helped our own organization with MCEP when we had our loss of Diane Bowman and had to transition successfully, I may add, to the new director who's online with us today. Also, I've been through transitions of leadership within my organizations that I work for, where we have to worry about moving culture from one transition to another. And I think that's one of the most important things that happen when you transition a leader of an organization, is to make sure that the good parts of the culture that you want to keep stay, and the parts of the culture that you need to change have the opportunity to change. So I think we have a tremendous opportunity for innovation with ACEP. We have opportunities for innovation with how we practice. We have innovation for how we recruit our members, and developing a sound financial background for our college. And I think there's a lot of things that we need to be working on in those regards on our board.
Thank you, Dr. Baker. Dr. Haddock.
Hi, good afternoon. It's great to be here. Thank you for bringing us all together. I'm going to be pretty brief because I think one of the most important things that we can do as board members is listen to our members and hear about the issues that are important to you, and I want to make sure we have time to answer your questions. I am currently faculty at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas. I work clinically at our Level 1 Trauma Center County Hospital, so seeing a very underserved population, particularly in a state that hasn't expanded Medicaid. But I completed residency in Michigan at the University of Michigan, and in fact, several of you on this call were my faculty as residents, but it's also where I sort of grew up as an ACEP member and sort of discovered the magic of getting involved at a chapter level as well as at a national level with our organization. I'm really passionate about ACEP because of our ability to be advocates for the individual emergency physician. I think some of the most important things that we do are those little things that can make the individual emergency physician's life better, whether that's advocating with the Joint Commission for us to be able to have food and drink at work, or more of the state level advocacy on issues like liability reform. And I will say that one of the things that I've learned, particularly in my involvement as the chair of the State Legislative Committee, is that some of the most important advocacy that can have the biggest impact for our members really happens on the state level and on the chapter level. So a project that I'm currently working on that I'm very excited about is working on integrating and improving communication between all of those who are working on leadership development for our members. So Michigan has a great leadership development program for young members and those who are looking to get started in the college. And I'm working on ways that we can increase communication between the states that are running those programs, as well as YPS, and sort of work to promote those programs a little bit better and make sure that people who are graduating from those programs are also telling all of their friends about how great it is to be a member of ACEP and how important it is to be an advocate for our specialty and how it can make our lives better. So I hope that you will choose to re-elect me so that I can continue on those important projects and many others. And I look forward to your questions and having a chance for a dialogue this afternoon. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. So what I was going to do now is ask Michigan members if they have a question to raise their digital hand. And I was going to go in reverse order and have you each answer it. So Dr. Haddock will be first, but they'll all get a chance to answer the same question. If you get the question, which could happen, after 2 or 3 people go, we'll have that person repeat it. But so if somebody has a question, if they can, hopefully I will see it. I don't see any in the chat part, but if you've got somebody wants to ask a question, hopefully I can see it here. If I'm not seeing one, just raise your, you can also just raise your hand too. All right, so I have a question. You know, racism has reared its ugly head again and come to the forefront in, you know, our worlds right now. And it's something we're seeing in the news every day. And it's a part of our lives. How should ACEP address that and deal with that? I'm not meaning to, I guess I'll leave it open-ended. Like, how should ACEP address this? You know, racism, it's so important, and what can we do about it? How can the emergency physicians help?
So I definitely need to acknowledge Dr. Terry's work on this issue that she's been working on for many years. And I think that some of the progress that we've made in part because of her advocacy has been really important. So we offer implicit bias training, like a CME module on implicit bias that I think is an important resource for our emergency physicians to take and help be aware of our biases to improve our practice. I don't think that's enough. I think some of the work that we've done in the task force trying to make sure that we are promoting and bringing up members from different backgrounds to leadership positions across the college is really important, and sort of being aware of that as we are going about the business of the college on a day-to-day basis, and not just when it's a hot button issue in the news is very important. I am proud of the statement that we put out about racism as a public health issue, because I think it really is a big issue for our patients, issues of equity in healthcare. And I think things that we can do on an advocacy basis, like promote Medicaid expansion, are things that can make a real difference for our patients in making sure that we can achieve equity and access for all.
Thank you. Dr. Baker? Mike, you have to unmute yourself.
I thought I was unmuted. Can you hear me still?
Okay, I'm just hearing you right now for the first time.
Okay. So as far as, you know, race and how ACEP can help emergency physicians manage this, you know, I think that there are a lot of tools that ACEP has in place already. We mentioned the implicit bias training. I want to mention the diversity and health equity and inclusion section, the DHIE section. I think that's a really strong group that we really need to be listening to rather than telling them what to do. I think we need to understand that group and what that group has been working on. They've had some tremendous ideas, including mentorship programs that they're trying to put into place to try to mentor young and upcoming leaders, which I think is very important for what we do. ACEP does need to have a strong voice against discrimination of all types and against violence in general, but specifically violence against some of our minorities that we have been watching on TV every day. I think that we have several tools that we need to create at some point within our own emergency centers. I know as a medical director of a hospital that had a largely white community, that of all the providers that I was asked to let go, they have almost always been people of color. And I have a strong concern that we are putting biases in terms of how we handle patients at a site level and how we handle providers at a site level. And so I had to become a very strong advocate for those individual providers and develop the tools that I needed to do that and understand sort of what is it that the community is looking for and what the community wants, the community will tolerate, and become a strong advocate for that diversity within our emergency centers. And I think that we need to take those tools and bring those out to many other emergency center sites as well. And lastly, in terms of healthcare inequity in general, I think we have a tremendous opportunity with telemedicine to address some of these healthcare inequities. We are currently setting up programs to try to take care of certain types of discharged COVID patients, for example, patients that we know are not doing well for various reasons. I know that we don't all know the exact reasons why they're not doing well, but some of these minority groups don't have as much access to healthcare, have a lot of comorbidities, and we really want to provide them with a stable follow-up program to do that. And so that's another way that I've been actively involved in trying to address some of the healthcare inequities out there. So I think that there are ways that ACEP can address these issues, but I think that all starts with strong advocacy and a strong statement from ACEP that we will not tolerate such things.
Thank you. Dr. Terry?
Yes. Thanks for bringing up the topic. You know, I agree totally with my colleagues, Drs. Haddock and Dr. Baker, in what they've shared. I think that ACEP has made strides, no doubt about it, in this area. And it started with this huge diversity and inclusion initiative that Dr. Baker and I had the honor of serving on the task force for, I guess 4 years ago now or so, or maybe a little bit more. And I think out of that, there have been placed into the college's fabric institutionalized ways to ensure that diversity and all things that fall under diversity, which racism falls under that umbrella, have a place to live within the college where we can have dialogue and do work, not just today, not just this year in 2020 when so much is going on, but forever, right, in perpetuity. And so I'm proud of the college in that way. The implicit bias training modules came out of those efforts. But I also, and it's interesting you raised this question because just yesterday I did a lecture for some an internal medicine physician group who wanted to figure out how to create a culture of anti-racism within their practice. And there are a lot of ways to do it organizationally. I think first looking at it in a two-pronged way makes sense. And so first starting internally. So we need to sweep around our own front door, if you will, in the college and figure out how to improve circumstances for our own members within the college. And then I think there needs to be an outward facing or community facing or client facing or patient facing effort as well in terms of an anti-racist culture. I can say that I haven't personally used or heard the word racist or racism more than I have in the past week. So I'm just happy we're saying the word, which it really is beneficial. You know, it's becoming less taboo. I think it's important to make it clear that structural racism does not exist and it doesn't necessarily speak to bad people. And that, you know, it's important to be intentional about finding opportunities to remove structural barriers in our operations and in our policies that promote racism, even if unintentionally. And so I think I'm grateful that, you know, we're getting serious about it and putting things in place for that. But I think also for ACEP, it would behoove us to make sure that we thread equity throughout every single aspect of the college. And so in terms of HR with staff hiring, in terms of our strategic plan, in terms of every single aspect of our strategic plan should have a thread of equity within it. I think in terms of council and how we go about our council business and the like. And once we are intentional about thinking about how to thread equity throughout everything we do in the college, it will just become a natural part of our fabric. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Mullen?
Thank you. And I also really appreciate the question because I think this is something that we all struggle with. And I also think that it is really a wonderful and important moment that we are focusing on this and talking about it. Racism is a public health crisis, no doubt about it. I think there are 3 pieces that ACEP can work on, and I think that we have certainly made some progress, but we have a lot of work to do. The first is, you know, within ourselves, and that comes to mentorship and recruiting new leaders within the college, within the council, within the practice of emergency medicine. Certainly we've made some strides, but can we do better? Absolutely. And the second is really understanding where our patients come from and how we can do a better job to address the social determinants and the public health consequences of racism, access to care, but also just really as emergency physicians, as the safety net providers, we need to be very intentional in understanding where our patients are and what strategies we can use to engage them in care and how we can outreach to our communities to make sure that they get better care. I would love to see ACEP really be proactive in teaching our membership on how to do that, because this is certainly a skill that we don't have that needs to be developed. The third piece is advocacy. We, as emergency physicians, as physicians, we have a soapbox. So I think it is really important for each and every one of us to use it when we see racism, when we see microaggressions, to confront it in a very active way, and also to use our voices in the public sphere to talk about this. I want us to focus on it because I worry that this is another moment where we talk about it for this week, maybe next week, and then it goes away. This needs to have staying power, and so it's something that we need to commit to focusing on for the future. And so I think it's really important, and I really appreciate the question. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Venkat?
So I agree with all my colleagues, and thank you for the question. I think for ACEP that there are two aspects of this, one external and one internal. On the external side, I'm going to borrow a phrase I actually heard from Dr. Cherry, is that we need to be intentionally relevant when we are looking at how do we respond to social crises like racism. I'm glad that ACEP has been front-facing on this issue, but I also am concerned that we were behind some of the other emergency medicine organizations in putting forward a public statement on this issue. And that's not for a lack of our effort, it's for a lack of coordination or the size of our organization or how to go about it. So I think that the way that we address racism is that we need to look internally, which is the second point, about how do we develop a diverse bench of leadership. And I draw on my experience in Pennsylvania as why I think this is so important. In Pennsylvania, we codified in our bylaws that in nominations for our leadership, that it should reflect the diversity of our chapter in all its forms. And that has led us to be very intentional in developing a bench of leaders from the ground up, from our younger members to a racially diverse members to practice diversity, to make sure that we were developing leaders who then would be a voice to make sure that we are taking into account all aspects when we are publicly facing in our advocacy. I had a chance to speak with a leader in the diversity section that Dr. Baker alluded to, and he brought up the example that in New York, the testing sites that were rolled out for COVID-19 were rolled out initially on the Upper East Side and Upper West Side of Manhattan, where there was not a predominant number of cases, and certainly not the predominant number of cases among racial minorities. And that was a function of who was making those decisions. And so we need to develop a diverse bench of leaders so that when we are having discussions about how to be intentionally relevant on the issue of racism, that we hear all voices. And the other aspect I would say to that is that it's extremely important to have a diverse leadership for the effectiveness of our advocacy. And I saw this in our balanced billing work in Pennsylvania. We have a huge rural-urban divide in Pennsylvania, and we needed a leadership that could communicate, whether it's a legislator from inner city Philadelphia or Pittsburgh, or a rural legislator from the northern tier of Pennsylvania. And that comes about from developing a diverse leadership. So I agree with my colleagues. I think we need to be the voice for our patients and the public, and the way we do that is by being very specific in how we develop a diverse set of leaders so we hear those voices.
Thank you. So Dr. Venkat, I'm going to throw the next question at you, and we'll go in that reverse order back, if you don't mind doing two in a row.
Sure.
I guess I get, well, good. I have some hands up, so you won't just get my question here. I think Brad's got a question for you, so I'll let him go. And then I've got...
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you for taking the time. I'm Brad Walters. I hope everybody knows me. So one of the things that has, I think, divided the college quite a bit is various different employment modes. I'm a hospital-based, hospital employed. We have private equity firms. Equity has become a very contentious issue. Great concerns that leadership within ACEP will carry biases based on their situation of employment that might not necessarily be in concert with what other members may want, or even ACEP itself. We are seeing greater consolidation of hospitals. My hospital system just announced that it's consolidating with two other hospitals, or at least in the negotiation phase, in Illinois and Wisconsin, and I'm based here in Michigan. How do we, we've always talked about the broad tent and bringing people in, but it seems like it's been getting more and more contentious, not just within our own tent, but within other emergency organizations. And let's be specific, AAPM. So I just wanted your comments on that, and I'd be interested in hearing that, and I'll mute myself at this point. Something people
Thanks, Brad.
For a long time.
Thanks, Brad, for the very important question. I think there are two aspects of this again. First is that the divisions that we're seeing among our membership related to consolidation and private equity, while I agree that we need to address the issue, I think the root cause of this goes back to the reimbursement system that we have. When we have a volume-based reimbursement system, or solely volume-based reimbursement system, that is going to lead to consolidation. It's led to consolidation among hospitals, it's led to consolidation among insurance companies, and that's inevitably going to lead to consolidation in the physician community, including the emergency physician community. So I'd say first, we need to be directing our reimbursement advocacy to address that so that we have compensation for capacity and readiness and for our frontline public health role, because that is how we ensure that we as emergency physicians, as the front line of the healthcare system, are addressing this. The second piece is related to your concerns, or the expressed concern about bias among ACEP leaders. ACEP's role is to fight for our members, and our leaders need to be very clear that our role is fighting for our members, specifically as relates to clinical autonomy, clinical decision-making, due process, and responsibilities in contract transitions, and how emergency physicians are the leaders in emergency care. For me, this came to home because in Pennsylvania, we allow integrated delivery networks where insurance companies own health systems. Highmark Blue Cross actually owns my health system, Allegheny Health Network, where I've practiced for 13 years. During my time as chapter president, our two biggest fights were with Highmark Blue Cross related to insurance downcoding and surprise medical billing. And I did not shy away from that fight. I led those fights, and ultimately successfully. And that's because I believe that as a potential leader within the college, my responsibility is to all of you, it's to the members. So I think it goes back to what is the root cause of this, which is a reimbursement system that is frankly flawed by only focusing on volume and not on public health. And secondly, looking at the track records of our leaders and where are their commitments and what have they shown to be able to fight ultimately for our members, and how they need to be the leaders moving forward. So that's my perspective on this issue, and what I would hope to bring if I'm privileged enough to be elected to the board.
Dr. Mullen?
Yeah, so great question. I agree. We're at risk for further consolidation. I mean, no doubt about it. The stress we've seen with our volumes, any time of stress we're going to see increased consolidation. So I expect that just to accelerate. And then the question around private equity. So we've all talked about how this is controversial, but for years, I think we talked about it in closed doors. We talked about it amongst ourselves, but we had not talked about it as a group, which is why I brought the private equity resolution last year. Because I think this is a big issue for the college, and it is a big issue for our members. And the way that we can move forward and the way that we can build consensus is by talking about it as a group. I think it's really important. I actually have an utmost respect for my counselors. You guys are amazing. You are creative. You are resilient. We have so many brilliant people out there that I think it is important that we talk about these issues together and work through them. Yes, they can be controversial. Yes, people can have conflicts over their own employment, but I think we can work through it. I think it is just important to be open and honest and to have these discussions. I also think ACEP represents emergency physicians. And if we are dogmatic about acting in our own self-interest, then we can all come together because we all practice in the same environment. We all face the same pressures in terms of seeing patients, of reimbursement. We all have these similar challenges. And if we're dogmatic in acting in our own self-interest, we can build consensus and move forward. So for what I think that I bring here is I am not afraid to bring up controversial issues. I'm not afraid to bring them up in a way that I think we can reach consensus on them, but we have to talk about it, we have to look at it, and we have to study it. So I think it is really important. It's an important question. It's a huge issue for our specialty, and we need to work through it. But I know that we can do that together. So thank you.
Dr. Terry?
Sorry about that. You guys can hear me? Okay. Thank you, Brad, so much for that question. Obviously, it's an excellent one. You know, I see the whole issue around consolidation, private equity, and the like being based largely upon the fact that healthcare has changed such that it's now very much profit-driven and very much business-oriented. And the problem with that I think we need to focus on as a college is that that creates competing interests when it comes to taking care of patients. Those interests compete with what's in the best interest of patients. And then as physicians, that creates conflict for us we have promised to be advocates for patients. And so it speaks to all kinds of downstream effects, such as our wellness, even as physicians, when we feel that we don't have the autonomy or the resources to be able to work in patients' best interests. I think if we approach this problem from the standpoint of the patient's best interests, we may have an opportunity to make some really meaningful change. And, you know, I just stated what I think is a part of the problem. And certainly in health policy, it's funny because in Journal Club, we often talk about all day, like, well, this is the problem. This is the problem. This is what's wrong. But how do you fix it? What do we do about it? And that's obviously the harder part of it. I think that at the level of ACEP leadership, it is very important that we as a college make it clear the expectation around transparency relative to our work environments and the models within which we work. I think that there needs to be increasing clarity. And I actually think already the conflict of interest statement that we as leaders have to sign is pretty clear, but I think it needs to be further emphasized around transparency. I also find that the most meaningful way to get to change is through policy, right? And so you just have to create a law or some type of codification to result in the what you're looking for to happen. And I think it's complicated because different states have different corporate practice of medicine laws. Not all states have a corporate practice of medicine law. And then the states that do have those laws, which they're intended to prevent physicians from getting entangled with making money off of patients. But in the states that do have those laws, there have been workarounds perhaps made by, you know, certain companies and the like. And so I think that one way to kind of slice the pie and try to result in some real meaningful change will be at the state level, again, in terms of looking very specifically at the corporate practice of medicine laws in each state and how they may need to be updated or if they're being enforced properly and what needs to happen to maybe get them to be enforced in a more meaningful way. And it's a bit controversial because some say that those laws are actually archaic and really have no real meaning today in the year 2020, but I think it's up for debate. So I'll stop there. I want to certainly hear from the rest of my colleagues, but I think that that's one way that we can tackle it through, one, transparency on our part and our own accountability as leaders, and then secondly, through policy at the state level.
Thank you. Dr. Baker?
All right. Well, I want to echo what Dr. Terry said a little bit there, in that I think that any leader within ACEP is going to be putting the best interest of the patient first. I think that it is just morally and ethically important for us to realize that although we advocate for physicians, what we're really advocating for is for the best possible care of the patients that we serve, and to be able to give those physicians that are taking care of those patients the tools that they need to do that. So with that being said, I think we need to recognize that this is not a new issue. It sounds like a new issue because it has different names and different acronyms, but this is really a similar issue to what we've experienced over many years. ACEP has always supported a variety of business models, and partly that happens because we don't know how things are going to change for us from year to year to year. And we've seen a lot of shifts in how we get paid and the types of activities that we need to do within our emergency centers. And some business models do well, some don't. And that diversity of those business models actually helps strengthen us as a specialty, because we always have somebody else we can look to and say, well, maybe this works better or that works better. So we've been doing this for a long time. I can even remember back in the 90s when there was an uproar at ACEP when a garbage company bought an emergency medicine group. And there was a lot of concerns then about that very same issues about, well, what's going to happen and what are the provider voices going to be and such. And as it turns out, ACEP has done a tremendous job in trying to make sure that those providers get what they need. And I think that brings me to my second point, which is that ACEP's key role for this is in advocating for our providers and our patients, making sure that we're advocating for proper due process for the providers, so they can have an independent voice, so they can have an independent way that they practice and take care of the patients, so that we can also advocate for fair payment for those providers as well. And then lastly, to make sure that we're strong advocates for the concept that the emergency physician should be the leader of an acute care team, that we make sure that the financial side of this doesn't interfere with the quality side in terms of making sure that a physician leads those teams. And then my third and final point is that ACEP is in a tremendous position to do what it does best, which is encourage collaboration between groups. We do a lot of work within ACEP from the umbrella of ACEP down, but where a real leader becomes a real strong leader is when they can take groups that they're not directly reporting to or reporting down from and pull those different groups together for a common cause. And there are so many different common causes that we can do with all these different types of groups and different types of business models, from making sure that we have balanced billing plans in place so that we don't get rolled over by the insurance industry, develop care innovations and guidelines for care, and even most importantly, I think, is data collection. ACEP has a tremendous ability to collect data and help other groups collect data and share that data back with them to try to advocate for emergency care and better payment and better care for patients through some of the networks that we have. We have CEDAR that collects data. We have Equal that collects data, and those types of collaborative work with those different groups is where ACEP then starts having a voice within those groups to provide the guidance and to provide to be the advocate for due process and fair payment, and allowing providers to have an independent voice within those groups. So I think that's really where the key is that we have the ability to collaborate in ACEP, and I think we need to use it for that purpose.
Dr. Haddock?
So I think this is a really important issue, and that our members have really continued to bring this up as an important issue when we look where emergency physicians are congregating. There's a lot of talk about different employment models and sort of what they mean for our practice. Really, if you have not read the ProPublica article based on what's been happening in Houston recently, it is an interesting and important one to read, and in some ways upsetting one to read, showing that the employers are not always serving the best interests of the physicians and the patients, either one of us. So I think transparency is really key. I think everyone comes to situations with bias based on their past experiences, and that we should all be transparent about our biases, wherever they may come from. And if they come from our employment models that we work in or other experiences that we've had, I think having that level of transparency with the council and with the membership is really important for all of our ACEP leaders at all levels. And I think also just centering around the interests of the emergency physician is important. I think I trust every individual emergency physician goes into their shift wanting to do the right thing for their patients. And I think we're sometimes put into a system that doesn't allow us to do that. And that's where we run into trouble, and that's where we get frustrated. So I think if we center around the emergency physicians are centered around our patients, and that will lead us to where we need to be as an organization.
Thank you. I'm going to leave you in the spotlight there, Dr. Haddock, and I think that Dr. Jim Mitchner has a question that he wants to ask.
Good afternoon. Thank you for all participating. So ACEP has been around for 52 years. We have about 40,000 members. We're held in relatively high regard by the members of Congress, perhaps even more so now that we're identified as frontline providers. So my question is, should ACEP play a more meaningful role than we are now in nationwide health reform? And I'd appreciate, in the interest of time, everybody limit their answer to 1 minute or less. And I know you all have different perspectives on this.
Yes, this is kind of a lightning round one here. I think it's critical that ACEP plays a major role in achieving meaningful health reform. I think some of the actions that we've taken to protect the elements of the Affordable Care Act that protect our patients are really important. And I think that a lot of differences can be made at the state level, but we need to continue to be extremely active at the federal level to protect access to care. We support universal coverage. We want to make sure that all of our patients have coverage and access to care, and we need to do everything we can at the national level to make sure that's happening. So I think as a member of the NEMPAC board as well, I think focusing on making sure that we're tracking and monitoring legislation that improves access for our patients is critically important, and we should take advantage of the positive light that we've been put in by the pandemic to make sure that we have a front row seat at that table.
Dr. Baker.
So I'll try to be brief also. Yes. So just kidding. So just kidding. So yes, I do think that ACEP does need to play a more meaningful role in healthcare reform. I believe that the 911 network has been out there and trying to advocate for incremental changes with the healthcare system, and trying to mobilize our providers to let the Congress and the Senate know what is important to us. I think that we need to have a very strong sense of what is important to ACEP members and to our patients. And I think of those things that Dr. Haddock had mentioned, and things I want to add too, is that we definitely need to have some type of universal coverage, and that should be one of the goals, I think, of ACEP, is to find a way to have a universal coverage. Whether it is what the best way to achieve universal coverage is going to be up to the legislators. But I think that's one of the things we need to do. And then the other thing is we need to make sure that pre-existing conditions remain covered as much as possible for the patients that we see. Otherwise, what we'll end up with is a whole lot of patients that have pseudo coverage and not actual coverage for the conditions that they're seeking care.
Thank you. Dr. Terry?
All right, so this is actually great. I love this. This is so fun. I agree. Yes, absolutely. ACEP has to be a champion for healthcare reform, and specifically for universal care. It would not make sense to me if we did not, based on this patients that we serve. And so to that end, I also realize, though, that politically speaking, there is a climate and there's a timing that is followed in terms of when is the best time to strike as far as pushing for certain types of legislation. And I think that honestly, we have focused a lot at the federal level on out-of-network billing and that issue over the past couple years, and rightly so. I think to now in 2020, given the clear magnification of how certain communities are affected disproportionately from COVID and other conditions, likely due to partly, at least in part, lack of adequate health care and primary care and preventive services, now might be the time to really get back on the bandwagon, if you will. It's not really a bandwagon, but get back to it in terms of pushing hard for universal healthcare reform, particularly given that it's a presidential election year.
Thank you, Dr. Mullen.
100%, absolutely. This is firmly within our wheelhouse. We should lead this effort. We should advocate for universal coverage. We have desperately underfunded public health in this country. We should advocate for change there. And again, this is where we should lead. I absolutely 100% think that this is what we should be doing, and we should own this.
Dr. Venkat.
Absolutely agree. And I would go a step further, also as an MPAC board member. I think this needs to be a fundamental aspect of how we evaluate who we support within the political system as to whether they support universal coverage and have a realistic policy for how to get there. We have universal access right now. It's us. And our microphone will never be bigger than it is now in expressing that that is not an adequate system for our patients. So my view, and what I've always tried to bring forward, is that we need to use our voice to advocate for our patients and the need for universal coverage and, frankly, a healthcare economic system that makes sure that we are there for our patients, not only in the emergency department, but in all aspects of healthcare. And we are uniquely positioned to do so.
Thank you. I believe Dr. Mead has a question, and then Dr. Shackle.
Thanks, and thank you everyone for being here and sharing your time today. I do have a question for the group. So as we know, COVID-19 has completely wreaked havoc on all of our educational conferences and CMEs. ACEP 2020 is in Dallas is going virtual, as have many of our events here in Michigan. In fact, all of them since March. Do you think this will have long-lasting implications even after 2020, in future years? Will our way we run conferences and CME events be changed indefinitely or evolve? Or do you think it will just kind of go back to everyday business after this year? Thank you.
Dr. Venkat.
Thanks for the question, Therese. I completely agree that it has been a disruptive event, and I think unfortunately that their disruptions will continue until that there is a vaccine. And I'm not quite as optimistic as our public health experts that this is going to happen by the end of the year. I think there are two things that ACEP needs to do in recognition of this. First, we need guidance from national as to how to help chapters and sections when they're coming with this decision of canceling their meeting. We faced this in Pennsylvania because our annual meeting was in April. So we were getting pressure from our hotel who would not let us out of our contract. We ended up going to our county and state public health departments to say, this is ridiculous that if there are cases and quarantines that come out of a state emergency medicine conference, it will paralyze the emergency care system in Pennsylvania. I think that ACEP could have taken a more leading role in providing guidance to chapters on this. We had success with that, and I think that that messaging needed to go out to the chapters so that they could leverage that point in making the finances work when we have to cancel a meeting. On a second and more medium and long-term aspect, I think that until we have a clear system for safely holding large-scale events, and because of the financial pressures we're going to face as a college, we need to look very carefully at how national collaborates with chapters in holding regional events to meet members where they are, especially in context of limited travel budgets. And that may take the form of jointly hosted and sponsored events as opposed to separated events like the large scientific assembly we would normally hold in Dallas and the state level events. And I think that includes pooling resources so that the financial risk is less for chapters and national. So my perspective, if I'm elected to the board, is that we need to look at both of those aspects. How do we help our chapters legally in addressing this issue and to keep their financial shirts? And how do we continue to engage with our members educationally based on the limitations that are likely to be there moving forward?
Mr. Mullen?
Yeah, so this is a hard time, right? Because there's no way to plan for a large scale meeting right now. No one knows what's going to happen. And a lot of us have, that's a big part of our calendar, is attending meetings. Our chapters have large gatherings, and that's how we do the chapter's business. I think we have learned a lot about how to hold meetings electronically, like this one over Zoom. I think those parts, there's been some value add, right? It's hard to bring people together. Travel is a challenge, particularly for folks in rural areas. So at least in my state, we have been able to get a lot more involvement from folks from rural areas who would have had to travel for really long distances to come participate in some of our meetings. So I can't say that it is all bad. However, I do recognize this is a revenue source for a lot of chapters, my own included. And so we're going to have to be creative in how we backfill some of that, at least for the next year. I also think, like, I personally really feel the loss of our scientific assembly. I think a huge part of what that meeting is getting to know everyone, seeing each other in person, and networking. And I think for our members, they use that as a huge place to come together, to meet people in person, and to network. I don't know about the rest of you, but I am also, feel sometimes like I'm trapped in this Zoom world. So I can't wait to get to a point where I can get back and actually see human beings in real live person. So I do think that there is still going to be a role for large in-person meetings once we hopefully inevitably get through this. So I guess my answer is mixed. I think that the small meetings and our chapter meetings are going to probably change. There are some advantages to that in terms of being able to access people who had travel restrictions. But I do see us having large meetings in the future because we can't do everything on Zoom. As much as I'm spending my life on this computer, I would love to actually meet you in person. And I think that we are losing something by not having that opportunity.
Thank you. Dr. Terry?
Thank you so much for that question, Dr. Mead. To answer it, no, I absolutely do not think that we are going to go back to business as usual after COVID-19. I think that we have been indelibly changed, actually, as a society in many ways forever. And I think that it's important that we look at it as an opportunity, really. When we decided as a board to switch to 100% virtual scientific assembly, it was a tough decision, certainly, and we considered every single avenue that we could think of. But in the end, I ended up being really grateful and glad that we made the decision to do it virtually, not just because it seems to be the responsible and safest thing to do, but also because I think, again, it's a huge opportunity to figure out where we land as a college in terms of being nimble and in terms of being able to adjust and in terms of really increasing our abilities technology-wise relative to innovation, because I do see this format as being something that we're going to have to employ even after COVID-19. I do believe that we're going to come together again in large groups, but I also see more of a hybrid approach becoming routine, where it's a mix of virtual and in person. And so I'm actually excited for what's going to happen for ACEP 2020. I think it's up to us as an organization to get the word out that ACEP 2020 is not just going to be Zoom on steroids. It's going to be an amazing explosion of technology and interaction and engagement, and we're doing our very best to make it amazing, actually. And there are industries and there are other companies that are doing it well in terms of these virtual meetings, and in fact, some organizations are finding increased profits from these virtual meetings due to the fact that it's easier to get to. Obviously, you're not having to travel, and they're seeing increased engagement. And so I just think that it's important that we find the silver lining and that we figure out how to be the best we can be in this venue, and prepare for the future that very well may include more of this. I also think that one thing that ACEP can do in a very tangible way is offer free CME. So we know that a lot of departments are no longer covering CME, at least for this year, certainly. And so that's an issue in terms of getting CME and the like. And so I think that as a college, it would be a really nice gesture to offer to our members free CME, given that we know it's really hard to come by these days.
Thank you. Dr. Baker.
All right, well, I want to echo a little bit about what Dr. Mullen and Dr. Terry is saying about the ability to collaborate. I do feel that that's been a part of a traditional CME experience, but the question is going to be, how does that happen moving forward? And I think that's the part that we miss the most when we go online. And so I think that having combinations of online and in-person groups is going to be important as we move forward into this. But really, COVID-19 and all the stuff that's been happening has really just accelerated change and adoption of technologies. We see it with the doctor's offices all of a sudden going to telemedicine. We see it with all of a sudden small businesses that never used to be able to order things online, like restaurants, are suddenly able to order things online. And so we just see a rapid change in the adoption of some of these new technologies moving forward. So I think that's not unexpected. And so what we're really experiencing is not simply a isolation because of COVID, but rather a change because of something that was already in process just being accelerated. And that's because, online education is more convenient. We certainly can work on quality of the education. We've seen examples of ACEP doing a lot of great education on buprenorphine waivers by telemedicine, for example, and that work certainly is going to continue. We see some more innovations. I've been working with a small group of people to develop a virtual journal club for telemedicine to try to spread some of those things out. But I think the number one thing that we have to be concerned about is not the collaboration, not how we're going to deliver this content, not the quality of the content, but how does ACEP work with the state chapters so that we're not stepping on each other's toes? Because right now, the income part of the business model for those state chapters is around their educational programs. And so that's going to be a real threat, I think, to the chapters moving forward. And I think it's something that each chapter is going to have to look at individually, but also we need to look at as a larger organization. How do we prevent how do we work together so we can put on a good program, but have both ACEP benefit from some of those programs and the chapters benefit from some of those programs as well. In the past, we used to even have some regional limitations. You could only have one CME event outside of your own state. And that was specifically put in place to prevent people from going to popular venues in other states and taking revenue away from those chapters. So I think that's one of the most serious things we actually need to be thinking about moving forward that I don't know that we've actually discussed yet.
Thank you, Dr. Haddock.
I think a lot of great comments have already been made. I served on the planning committee for the annual ACEP meeting before I served on the board, and I'm now the board liaison to the education committee. So I'm particularly been focused on what we do with our educational offerings. And I will say that I think ACEP has looked largely the same for a lot of years, and I do think that this will be the trigger for an opportunity to innovate and come up with new ways for ACEP to look a little bit different and offer new things to different audiences. And I'm hopeful that this will be not just a change, but an opportunity for us to turn the conference into something a little bit bigger and better and more accessible than what it's been in the past. So the biggest issue that I think we have is the networking component of it, particularly for those of us who are involved, like counselors and involved in sections and committees, that there's something about being there in person and those side conversations that you have, the meeting before the meeting and the meeting after the meeting, that are a little bit hard to replicate electronically. And so I think that's one of the biggest focuses that we need to to have as we migrate things over, but that we also look for opportunities for that to allow us to cast a bigger net and bring people in. You know, I'm sure many of you feel like I feel, which is at the ACEP meetings, there's more than what you can possibly do every day that's happening every day. So maybe this shift will allow us to bring more people, capture more people into sections and committees and chapter meetings that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to grab up in the ACEP net, and really expand our offerings and make this more instead of less. And I am hopeful that we have an excellent staff who are really forward looking and are going to be able to tackle this challenge.
Thank you. Dr. Shackle,
Thank you so much. I wanted to talk to you guys about value. All of us are here because ACEP has value to us, and we see the value of ACEP. In conversations with colleagues where I work, in all stages of their careers, but especially the new graduates who have been out for 5 years or less, many who don't participate regularly or in what goes on behind the scenes see limited value of ACEP for the cost, particularly in light of the coronavirus pandemic coming forward. And this was comes from a conversation I had with a colleague just last week as membership dues come up. Especially with the virtual conference and limited in-person offerings for the foreseeable future with the pandemic, how does ACEP demonstrate our value, retain our existing members, and recruit and actively involve our new membership?
Thank you for bringing, I think I'm first, yeah? Okay. Thank you for bringing up this issue. I think it's incredibly important. We've actually seen a drop off in recent years in the number of folks, you know, EMRA has excellent penetration of the market of emergency medicine residents. 90%-ish of residents are members. But we've seen the number who are continuing after residency drop off from 65-ish% of residents to more like 55 or even more like 50% of graduating residents are retaining their membership. So I think this is an extremely critical issue for the college. I think our advocacy efforts are our biggest value, and our role as advocates for the individual emergency physician is critical. And I think finding a way that everyone can feel like an active participants in those efforts and in other activities in the college is critical. I've talked with some staff members and board members about the concept of micro-volunteering and how can we make people who don't want to put in the level of effort that we're all putting in, like which is a very high level of effort into the college, but want to put in some lower level of effort that really brings them a feeling of engagement and like they're making a difference without having to commit hours per week to the mission. And I think that's really important for bringing people in. I think another thing that we can do is expand our cadre of young physicians who are passionate about ACEP and will go around promoting it to their colleagues. So that's why I think those leadership development programs that happen at the chapter level are really critical, and that any way we can expand them and support the YPS section, the young physician section in their efforts as well is important, because if you're surrounded by people like us who are so passionate about ACEP, then I think you're much more likely to want to continue your membership and want to seek out those micro-volunteering opportunities and want to be involved, because if you're engaged, then you're going to stay a member. It's when you're disengaged and passive that you might consider it to not have as much value for you. So the more we can do to expand the passion and engagement of our members, it's critical.
Dr. Baker.
So, you know, I think that this question goes back to sort of how do we build membership? And, you know, there's two ways to build membership. There's early members and late members. So early members are those members that are recently, you know, graduating or thinking, maybe even thinking about going into emergency medicine. And then the late members are those that have maybe lapsed and haven't come back, or maybe were never part of ACEP, and how do we reach out to them? So the last group is probably the toughest group, and the only way we're going to reach out to them is by working and engaging with our state chapters to go out to the individual groups that are practicing and taking care of patients in the emergency center, and really advocating for ACEP to those individual groups. And I think that's a big role that the state chapters could play. And I think ACEP needs to have a role in providing some of the technologies to do that. We have small chapters that don't really understand how to do that type of work over a large space of land where they can't travel, but we have the ability now to do that all through video and video conferencing. I think the other thing is the second part is starting early. And so, we focus a lot on our young physicians, but I think we can focus even more. We have EMRA as an organization, but I think within ACEP, we need to develop ways of providing micro leadership, so small opportunities for young physicians to get engaged and become part of ACEP. And then from those micro leadership opportunities, they can get the mentorship they need to improve and continue to grow along their development. I think that the earliest that we should be reaching out, and I don't know that we're doing as much of this as we should, is actually reaching out to medical schools. MCEP had a great program with the medical students of reaching out to the people that are thinking about entering emergency medicine residencies and really showing them what it's like, really getting a one-to-one conversation with some of the emergency physicians. And I think when you make those impressions early on, you gain lifetime and lifelong members that way. And so, I think by engaging the chapters and then engaging the residency programs and then trying to reach out to some of the medical groups to try to engage some of their providers are the great ways that we should be reaching out and building our membership.
Thank you, Dr. Terry.
Yes. Thank you again for a great question. In my opinion, it boils down to being intentional about being relevant to our members. And while I certainly love advocacy and I love policy, and I could talk all day about prudent layperson standard and out-of-network billing and what's the difference between regulation and legislation, the fact is, for most normal people, that's not exactly enticing. No one wants to necessarily hear much about it. We like to reap the rewards, certainly, from ACEP lobbying on the Hill and working on all of these really important advocacy efforts. But I think that for the typical, layperson member and emergency physician, they're a little bit too far removed from the hardcore advocacy and policy pieces. And so while I think that the work that ACEP is doing around advocacy is absolutely vital and we have to continue to do it, I don't think that we can depend on that work to serve as a reliable vehicle for value through the eyes of our members, because it hasn't necessarily worked so far, right? I mean, we've certainly been maintaining our own, but as Dr. Haddock said, we have seen reductions. And so I think that in terms of being relevant, we have to figure out where the sweet spot is. And we're working on that. We're currently piloting a handful of different membership models with different price points and different offerings and the like. And we're actually, that's been launched already to really get some data around what it is that members want and need in terms of a membership package, specifically relative to the contents of what's offered and also the price. I also think that in terms of relevancy, this year, again, has shown us ways to be relevant to our members. For example, the COVID-19 field guide that ACEP produced and is now online and is a real living document that serves individual emergency physicians very well in their practice of taking care of COVID-19 patients and the like, and themselves for that matter, has been a huge hit. It has increased engagement amongst our members. It continues to be referenced outside of even ACEP amongst other organizations and agencies. And that is a way to be relevant to members so that they see the value of what their organization is giving them. I think another example of relevance speaks to, again, ACEP taking a stand and speaking out against structural racism and creating policies and whatnot, and being intentional about advertising those efforts on social media so that our members see, wow, they're thinking about me as an individual person. This is what's affecting my life today. And I think it's worth spending my dollars on ACEP membership. And so I think those are ways that we can bring true value to our members. And I think we have to be even more intentional about advertising and making it very clear about these efforts that we are putting so much energy and time into every day. I'll say that I've been really proud of ACEP's response in terms of everything going on relative to structural racism and the like. But I got an email from a member who's a pretty connected member a couple nights ago saying, where is ACEP on this? And so from my vantage point, I'm like, what do you mean? We're in it, I promise you. But there's a disconnect that we have to work on in terms of publicizing and increasing awareness around what we are doing and how we are being relevant in order to get that value.
Thank you. Dr. Moulin?
Yeah, I agree. This last year, I think ACEP has really brought us together around COVID. The field guide was fantastic. I actually really appreciate my Amazon membership. So those are real tangible things that affect our members' lives. I also think that we have to recognize, like, why do we join ACEP and why do we stay connected? And I think it has to do with your colleagues and the group that you're in. So in your chapter, you are very engaged with the activities of your chapter and your colleagues within that chapter. And many of our members are really engaged with ACEP because of the sections. And so as much as we can build up those smaller organizations within ACEP where our members congregate and find value, that is what is important. In California, we launched a membership effort because we recognize that I know all of my California members, or at least I'm connected to them. And so we did a lapsed membership program. So anytime someone's membership lapsed, we called them. So someone from the chapter would pick up the phone and call that individual. We would send out a list. These are our lapsed members. Look through, and you would look down that list and say, well, I know half these people. I'd pick up the phone and call them. And our rate of return on that program was around 60% of those people actually rejoined. And so it's about building on those connections that people feel to their state chapter, to their section membership, and then empowering those smaller organizations to do those membership drives, to connect to people, because, you know, the things that drive me are not the things that drive everyone across ACEP. And so as much as we can build those smaller organizations where people can come together to pursue their interests, one, that keeps people engaged, and two, we benefit as a college by bringing those people together. They will be the innovators for what drives our specialty forward. So I think it's incredibly important, and it's something that we really need to focus on, is building up those small groups so people can innovate, come together, feel connected, and feel the value of ACEP as a whole organization.
Thank you. Dr. Venkat?
So I think it comes down to three things. First is meeting members where they are. And I agree with Aimee and Mike that a lot of this comes down to basic blocking and tackling of being in contact with your members and being present to your members. And even those who are not members, being present so that they can see that there are individuals who they want to be part of the group. And so I think that comes down to working with chapters and sections. We had a similar lapsed membership program in Pennsylvania and had very similar results. So I think being present and meeting members and potential members where they are through the chapters and sections is critical. I think the second piece is, what is your elevator speech to those who are not members? And the elevator speech that I have found to be effective is, regardless of our divisions within emergency medicine, to the outside world, ACEP is the face of emergency physicians. And so whatever issue you're interested in, whether it's in advocacy, whether it's in CME, whether it's in a particular area like toxicology, ACEP is going to be your voice and the one that is going to be effective in delivering for you by being part of the organization. And I think the third piece is, we need to do a better job, as Aisha said, about communicating our activities. In Pennsylvania, we were fortunate during my time as chapter president to have some significant wins when it came to downcoding, when it came to not requiring merit badges on surprise medical billing. There's a great saying, never let a good crisis go to waste. I think that we were able to engage our members and our potential members by showing them the value in communicating that these were significant threats and that their involvement made a difference. The best moment I had as chapter president was getting a message from a community emergency physician who was an assistant medical director in his group, who said, you know, I've been a member of FACEP for a long time. I didn't know what the membership value was. I see what work you're doing to make our lives better related to surprise medical billing. Now I'm a lifetime member because of that. And so being present through the chapters, having an elevator speech about your being the representative to the outside world and touting your successes that make things better for members, I think is the way that we show value and that we continue to bring members into the organization.
Thank you. Well, it looks like we're right at the 2:30 mark on my computer, so I can release all of you back to your lives. I appreciate the 5 candidates for taking the time to talk to us today. It really means a lot. We record this so people that haven't been able to get on today can see that. So I think it's even open to other states can be able to find that on our website. So I really appreciate your thoughtful answers and in making time for us, and good luck and with the election, and I hope to all see you again in person sometime somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your time. This was fun.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Be safe.
Yeah, be safe.